The morning sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook Estate as Prince Alexander adjusted his tie nervously. His wife, Princess Elena, stood beside him at their bedroom window, watching their new neighbors move boxes into the grand manor next door. The Thornfield family had purchased the historic property just 3 weeks ago, and today marked their first official day as residents of the exclusive royal quarter. Elena smoothed her emerald dress and sighed deeply. "I still can't believe someone actually bought the old Pemberton place. It's been empty for nearly 5 years." She watched as a tall man with graying temples directed several moving trucks with the precision of a military general. Behind him, a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair supervised the careful handling of what appeared to be priceless antiques. Alexander frowned as he observed the scene below. Father mentioned something about new money from the technology sector. Apparently, Mr. Thornfield made his fortune developing some revolutionary software. The Queen herself approved their residency application. He paused, noting the elaborate fountain being installed in the center of their neighbor's circular driveway. Though I must admit their taste seems rather extravagant. The couple had lived peacefully in their section of the royal quarter for 8 years since their marriage. Their estate, gifted by the king as a wedding present, bordered the ancient Pemberton manor on 2 sides. The previous owners, the elderly Pemberton sisters, had been quiet, respectful neighbors who understood the delicate nature of royal privacy. They had maintained their property beautifully while respecting the invisible boundaries that separated royal life from civilian life. Elena moved away from the window and picked up her morning tea. Mrs. Henderson from the village mentioned that the Thornfields have 2 teenage children. Apparently, they've been asking quite pointed questions about our daily routines, security protocols, and even our staff schedules. Her voice carried a note of concern that Alexander didn't miss. The prince joined his wife at their small breakfast table, laden with fresh pastries and local honey. Perhaps they're simply curious. It's not every day that ordinary citizens become neighbors to royalty. We should give them the benefit of the doubt, at least initially. Despite his diplomatic words, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that something about their new neighbors felt different from the usual wealthy families who occasionally moved into their exclusive district. Through the tall windows, they could see workers installing what appeared to be an extensive security system around the Thornfield property. Cameras were being mounted at strategic points, and a high-tech gate was being constructed at their main entrance. Elena noticed that several of these cameras seemed positioned to capture views of the royal estate's gardens and private courtyards. "Darling, look at that." Elena pointed toward their neighbor's property. "They're installing cameras that face directly toward our morning walk path and the children's playground we had built near the hedge line." She set down her teacup, with enough force to create a small clink against the saucer. "That seems rather invasive, don't you think?" Alexander studied the camera placement more carefully. His training in royal security protocols immediately raised red flags about the positioning and sophisticated nature of the surveillance equipment. "I think it might be wise to have James conduct a discreet security assessment of the situation. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before making any judgments." As if summoned by their conversation, their head of security, James Morrison, appeared at the breakfast room door. "Your Highnesses, I apologize for the interruption, but I believe there's something you should know about your new neighbors." His usually calm demeanor carried an undercurrent of tension that both Alexander and Elena immediately recognized. James approached their table carrying a thin folder. "I've conducted a preliminary background check on the Thornfield family, as is standard protocol for any new residents in the royal quarter. While Mr. Thornfield's business credentials are legitimate, there are several concerning elements about their family's recent activities and stated intentions for their residency here." Elena felt her stomach tighten as James opened the folder. "What kind of concerning elements?" she asked, though part of her already suspected that their peaceful life in Willowbrook was about to become significantly more complicated. The security chief cleared his throat before continuing. "It appears that Mrs. Thornfield has been in contact with several tabloid journalists over the past month, discussing what she calls unprecedented access to authentic royal daily life. Additionally, their son has been posting on social media about his family's move, specifically mentioning plans to document the real truth about how royals actually live." Alexander and Elena exchanged worried glances as the full implications of their situation began to unfold. Their private sanctuary, carefully protected for nearly a decade, was now potentially compromised by neighbors who seemed more interested in exploitation than peaceful coexistence. The morning that had started with simple curiosity about new neighbors was rapidly evolving into their first real crisis as a couple living in the public eye. 3 days after the Thornfields' arrival, Elena discovered the first real violation of their privacy. She had been tending to her prize-winning roses in the East Garden when she heard the distinctive whir of a camera with a powerful zoom lens. Looking up from her gardening gloves, she spotted 17-year-old Marcus Thornfield positioned at his bedroom window with professional photography equipment pointed directly at her. Elena's cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. She was wearing her oldest gardening clothes. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun and she had dirt smudged across her cheek. This was exactly the kind of candid, unflattering moment that tabloids paid thousands of pounds to acquire. She quickly gathered her gardening tools and retreated toward the house, feeling exposed and vulnerable in what had always been her private sanctuary. Inside the manor, she found Alexander in his study reviewing correspondence from the palace. "We have a problem," she announced, still slightly breathless from her hurried retreat from the garden. "That Thornfield boy was photographing me while I was gardening. He had professional equipment, Alexander. This wasn't some innocent teenage curiosity." Alexander immediately set aside his papers and reached for the secure phone line that connected directly to James Morrison's office. "This escalates the situation significantly. If they're taking unauthorized photographs, we need to understand their full intentions and take appropriate action." His voice carried the firm tone he reserved for serious security matters. Within 20 minutes, James arrived with additional concerning information. "Your Highnesses, I've discovered that the Thornfield family has established what appears to be a small media operation within their home. They've registered a business entity called Royal Proximity Productions and have been advertising exclusive, never-before-seen content featuring authentic royal lifestyle footage to various media outlets." Elena sank into her favorite armchair as the full scope of their neighbor's scheme became clear. "They've essentially set up a surveillance operation next door to us. This isn't about being wealthy neighbors who happen to live near royalty. This is a calculated business venture designed to profit from our private lives." James nodded grimly as he consulted his notes. "Mrs. Thornfield has been particularly active in reaching out to international tabloids, specifically those known for paying premium prices for candid royal content. She's promised them daily life documentation that no royal photographer has ever been able to capture." Alexander stood and began pacing behind his desk, a habit Elena recognized from their early courtship when he was wrestling with particularly difficult decisions. "What are our legal options? Surely there must be privacy laws that protect us from this kind of exploitation, especially given our official status." "The legal situation is complex," James explained. "While we can certainly pursue harassment charges and privacy violations, the process would likely take months to resolve through the courts. Meanwhile, they would continue their activities and potentially sell whatever content they've already gathered." Elena felt a growing sense of frustration and helplessness. "So we're essentially trapped in our own home while our neighbors run a commercial photography operation targeting us? This can't be legal and it certainly can't be ethical." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the study door. Their housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, appeared with an apologetic expression. "I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, Your Highnesses, but there's a Mrs. Thornfield at the front door requesting an audience. She says it's regarding mutual neighborhood concerns." Alexander and Elena shared a meaningful look. "This could be an opportunity to address the situation directly," Alexander mused. "Perhaps if we speak with her candidly about our privacy concerns, we can reach some kind of reasonable understanding." Elena wasn't entirely convinced, but agreed that a direct conversation might be their best option for immediate resolution. "Very well, but James should remain present during the meeting. I want a witness to whatever Mrs. Thornfield proposes or demands." Mrs. Thornfield was shown into the formal sitting room, where she appeared remarkably comfortable despite the grandeur of her surroundings. She was impeccably dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. "Your Highnesses," she began with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "I wanted to personally introduce myself and discuss what I believe could be a mutually beneficial arrangement between our families." She settled into the offered chair, as if she were an old friend rather than an uninvited neighbor with questionable motives. Elena maintained her composure despite feeling deeply uncomfortable with Mrs. Thornfield's presumptuous attitude. "We appreciate your visit, Mrs. Thornfield, but we must address some serious concerns about your family's activity since moving into the neighborhood." Mrs. Thornfield's smile widened, suggesting she had anticipated this conversation. "I'm so glad you brought that up directly. I believe there may have been some misunderstandings about our intentions, and I'm here to propose a solution that could satisfy everyone's interest while providing significant financial benefits for your charitable foundations." Mrs. Thornfield reached into her expensive leather handbag and produced a professionally prepared document folder. "I've taken the liberty of having my legal team prepare a partnership proposal that I believe addresses everyone's concerns while creating unprecedented opportunities for charitable fundraising." She placed the folder on the coffee table between them with the confidence of someone presenting a winning lottery ticket. Alexander glanced at the folder but made no move to open it. "Mrs. Thornfield, before we discuss any proposals, we need to address the unauthorized photography of my wife that occurred in our private garden yesterday. This kind of surveillance is completely unacceptable." Mrs. Thornfield waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away an annoying fly. "That was simply my son's enthusiasm for photography getting the better of him. Teenagers, you know how they are with their hobbies. But this is exactly why my proposal is so brilliant. It would eliminate any such misunderstandings by creating a formal, controlled arrangement." Elena felt her temper beginning to rise at the woman's casual dismissal of what felt like a serious violation. "Mrs. Thornfield, what you're describing as teenage enthusiasm, we consider to be an invasion of our privacy and a potential security risk. This isn't a hobby situation we're dealing with." James Morrison, who had been quietly observing from his position near the door, stepped forward slightly. "Mrs. Thornfield, we're aware of your business registration for Royal Proximity Productions and your communications with various media outlets. This suggests a level of premeditation that goes far beyond teenage photography interests." Mrs. Thornfield's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "You've certainly done your homework, Mr. Morrison. I respect thorough security work. But this is precisely why I'm here, to bring everything into the open and create a legitimate, profitable arrangement that benefits everyone involved." She opened the folder and began spreading documents across the table. "My proposal is quite simple. Your Highnesses would grant my family limited, controlled access to document certain aspects of your daily routines. Nothing too private, of course. Morning walks, garden parties, charitable events, that sort of thing. In exchange, we would share 60% of all proceeds with your designated charitable foundations." Alexander studied the documents without touching them, his expression growing increasingly stern. "Mrs. Thornfield, you seem to misunderstand our position entirely. We are not interested in commercializing our private lives under any circumstances, regardless of the financial benefits or charitable applications." Elena added firmly, "What you're proposing is essentially asking us to perform our lives for commercial entertainment. That fundamentally contradicts everything we believe about royal dignity and public service." Mrs. Thornfield leaned back in her chair, her demeanor shifting from friendly persuasion to something more calculating. "I understand your initial reaction. Truly I do. But perhaps you haven't considered the alternative scenarios. The media landscape is changing rapidly, and authentic content about royal life commands premium prices, whether it's officially sanctioned or not." The implicit threat in her words was unmistakable, and James Morrison immediately moved closer to the conversation area. "Mrs. Thornfield, are you suggesting that you intend to continue unauthorized surveillance and media sales regardless of their Highnesses' wishes?" "I'm simply pointing out market realities," Mrs. Thornfield replied smoothly. "My family has made a significant financial investment in our property specifically because of its proximity to royal residence. We need to see appropriate returns on that investment. Working together seems much more civilized than working separately." Elena felt a chill run down her spine as she realized they were essentially being extorted by their own neighbor. "Mrs. Thornfield, what you're describing sounds very much like blackmail. You're threatening to invade our privacy unless we agree to participate in your commercial venture." Alexander stood abruptly, his patience finally exhausted. "This meeting is over, Mrs. Thornfield. You and your family will cease all photography, surveillance, and media activities related to our household immediately. Any continuation of such activities will result in legal action and involvement from Royal Security Services." Mrs. Thornfield gathered her documents with deliberate slowness, her friendly mask completely abandoned. "Your Highnesses, I believe you're making a mistake that you'll come to regret. The modern world doesn't offer the same privacy protections that royalty once enjoyed. You can either participate in managing your public image, or you can let others manage it for you." As she reached the sitting room door, she turned back with a cold smile. "I'll give you 24 hours to reconsider my generous offer. After that, my family will proceed with our business plans according to our own judgment. I hope you'll make the wise choice." The moment Mrs. Thornfield left the room, Elena collapsed back into her chair, feeling emotionally drained by the encounter. "Alexander, what have we gotten ourselves into? She's essentially holding us hostage in our own home." James immediately began making notes on his security tablet. "Your Highnesses, I recommend we implement enhanced security protocols immediately and begin documenting all interactions with the Thornfield family. We're clearly dealing with a sophisticated operation designed to exploit your position." Alexander moved to the window and watched Mrs. Thornfield's confident stride as she returned to her property. "James, I want you to contact the Palace Security Division and the Royal Legal Team immediately. We need to understand all of our options for dealing with this situation before Mrs. Thornfield's deadline expires." Elena joined her husband at the window, watching their neighbor disappear behind her own front door. "Do you think she's serious about proceeding with or without our cooperation? This feels like something much more dangerous than simple neighbor problems." By evening, James Morrison had assembled a comprehensive security briefing that revealed the true scope of the Thornfield operation. Elena and Alexander sat in their private study as James presented findings that were far more disturbing than they had initially imagined. "Your Highnesses, the Thornfield family's activities extend well beyond simple media exploitation," James began, consulting his detailed report. "We've discovered that they've been conducting surveillance for at least 6 weeks before actually moving into the property. They rented observation posts in the village and have been mapping your daily routines, staff schedules, and security protocols." Elena felt her blood run cold as the implications became clear. 6 weeks of surveillance? That means they've been watching us since before they even owned the neighboring property. This was planned from the very beginning. Alexander's jaw tightened as he processed the information. "James, what kind of equipment are we talking about? How sophisticated is their operation?" "Professional-grade surveillance equipment worth approximately £200,000, James replied grimly. "Long-range cameras, audio recording devices, and what appears to be drone technology for aerial surveillance. This isn't amateur hour. They've invested serious money into this venture." The security chief continued his briefing with even more alarming revelations. "We've also discovered that Mrs. Thornfield has been in contact with at least 12 international media outlets, including several known for aggressive tactics and questionable ethics. She's been promising them exclusive content that she claims will revolutionize royal media coverage." Elena stood and began pacing the small study, her mind racing with the implications. "This means every private moment we've had for the past 6 weeks has potentially been recorded and could be sold to the highest bidder. Our morning conversations, our time with friends, everything." James nodded solemnly. "I'm afraid that's likely the case, Your Highness. But there's more. We've uncovered evidence that the Thornfield's teenage son, Marcus, has been using social media to recruit other young people in the area to act as informal surveillance assistants. He's been paying local teenagers to report on your activities when you visit the village or attend public events." Alexander slammed his hand down on his desk, causing Elena to jump slightly. "This has gone far beyond invasion of privacy. They've essentially created a surveillance network targeting us personally. This feels like organized stalking." The conversation was interrupted by the urgent ringing of the secure phone line that connected directly to Palace Security. Alexander answered immediately, and Elena could hear the tense voice on the other end, though she couldn't make out the specific words. "Thank you for the immediate notification," Alexander said into the phone. "We'll implement those protocols right away." He hung up and turned to his wife and security chief with a grave expression. That was Deputy Commissioner Williams from Palace Security. The Thornfields have just uploaded what they're calling sample content to a private media server accessible to potential buyers. The preliminary footage, apparently, includes intimate moments from our private garden conversations and Elena's morning yoga routine in our sunroom. Elena felt physically sick as she realized that her most private moments had been violated and were now being marketed for profit. Alexander, this has to be illegal. There must be laws protecting us from this kind of systematic harassment. James consulted his notes before responding. The legal situation is complex because of the unique nature of your public status, but the Royal Legal Team is already preparing multiple charges, including harassment, privacy violations, and potentially blackmail. However, the legal process could take months, during which time they could continue their activities. Alexander moved to comfort his wife, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. James, what are our immediate options? We can't allow this to continue while waiting for the legal system to resolve the matter. Deputy Commissioner Williams has authorized enhanced security protocols, James replied. We can implement electronic countermeasures to interfere with their surveillance equipment, and we can establish a protective perimeter that extends onto their property if necessary. We also have the option of requesting immediate intervention from Royal Protection Services. Elena looked up at her husband with determination, replacing her initial shock and fear. Alexander, I think we need to take a different approach. What if we turn this situation around and expose what they're doing before they can profit from it? Alexander raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his wife's suggestion. What do you have in mind? What if we arrange for our own media team to document the Thornfield surveillance activities? We could create a comprehensive record of their harassment and present it publicly as an example of the invasive tactics that royal families face from unscrupulous individuals. James considered the proposal carefully. That's actually quite brilliant, Your Highness. Instead of being victims of their exploitation, you would take control of the narrative and expose their methods. It would also create legal evidence for prosecution while generating public sympathy for your position. Alexander smiled for the first time since the crisis began. Elena, that's exactly the kind of strategic thinking that made me fall in love with you. We turn their own tactics against them while maintaining our dignity and privacy. The mood in the study shifted from defensive fear to proactive determination as they began planning their counterattack. Elena felt empowered for the first time since discovering the extent of their neighbor's betrayal. James, how quickly can we arrange for our own documentation team? Elena asked. I want to catch them in the act of surveillance and create an undeniable record of their activities. I can have a team in place by tomorrow morning, James replied. We'll document everything from their equipment placement to their active surveillance activities. By the time we're finished, the Thornfields will discover that their victims are far more resourceful than they anticipated. The next morning arrived with unexpected drama that accelerated their timeline dramatically. Elena was awakened at dawn by the sound of her private phone ringing, with an emergency tone she had hoped never to hear. Alexander answered immediately, and she could see his face grow pale as he listened to the caller. Mrs. Patterson has been approached by a tabloid reporter offering her £50,000 for information about our daily routines, personal conversations, and private habits, Alexander explained as he hung up. Apparently, the Thornfields provided the reporter with our staff, contact information, and suggested that our employees might be willing to sell inside information. Elena felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. They're trying to turn our own staff against us? These people have absolutely no boundaries or ethics whatsoever. She reached for her robe, her mind already racing with implications and responses. James Morrison appeared at their bedroom door within minutes, carrying urgent news that confirmed their worst fears. Your Highnesses, the situation has escalated overnight. We've intercepted communications indicating that the Thornfields have sold preliminary footage to 3 international outlets, and the content is scheduled to be published within 48 hours. Alexander immediately began dressing while issuing rapid instructions. James, activate our documentation team immediately. We need to catch them in active surveillance before they can claim they've ceased their activities. Elena, can you contact your personal assistant and arrange for our media relations team to prepare a preemptive statement? Elena was already reaching for her secure phone. I'm also going to call the Queen's private secretary. She needs to be aware that royal family privacy is under coordinated attack from commercial interests. This affects more than just our household. Within 2 hours, their estate had been transformed into a carefully coordinated operation designed to gather evidence while protecting their ongoing privacy. Professional photographers and videographers, all cleared by royal security, had taken discreet positions that allowed them to document the Thornfield surveillance activities without being detected. The timing proved perfect. By mid-morning, Marcus Thornfield was clearly visible at his bedroom window with professional photography equipment pointed toward Elena's private sitting room. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thornfield was positioned in her garden with what appeared to be sophisticated audio recording equipment aimed at Alexander's study window. Elena watched the documentation process from her secure position in the interior of their home, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and disgust as her neighbors' activities were systematically recorded. "It's remarkable how brazen they are," she commented to Alexander. "They're not even attempting to hide their surveillance activities." James approached with real-time updates from the documentation team. "Your Highnesses, we're capturing excellent evidence of their activities, but we've also discovered something else. There appears to be a third party involved, someone in a van, parked just outside the estate boundaries, who seems to be coordinating their activities via radio communication." Alexander frowned as he considered the implications. "This suggests they're part of a larger operation, rather than acting independently. James, can we identify the van and its occupants?" "Already working on it," James replied. "Our team has telephoto footage of the vehicle and its license plates. We should have identification within the hour." The breakthrough came sooner than expected. Elena's personal assistant burst into the study with news that changed everything about their understanding of the situation. "Your Highness, the media relations team has identified the van. It belongs to a private investigation firm that specializes in celebrity surveillance for tabloid magazines. The Thornfields aren't operating independently. They're part of a professional surveillance network." Elena felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. That explains the sophisticated equipment and coordinated timing. They're not just opportunistic neighbors. They're part of an organized business that specializes in exploiting public figures. Alexander immediately reached for the secure phone to contact Palace Security. "This changes our response strategy significantly. We're not dealing with amateur harassment. We're dealing with professional surveillance operatives who happen to be our neighbors." The call to Palace Security resulted in immediate escalation to the highest levels of Royal Protection Services. Within an hour, Deputy Commissioner Williams himself arrived at their estate with a team of specialists and some disturbing additional information. "Your Highnesses," the Deputy Commissioner began, "the Thornfield operation is more extensive than we initially realized. They've been targeting multiple royal residences across the country using similar tactics. You're not their only victims. They've been conducting a systematic campaign against royal privacy for at least 18 months. Elena felt simultaneously relieved that they weren't being personally targeted and horrified that other royal families were experiencing similar harassment. "Deputy Commissioner, how many families are affected? And why haven't we heard about this before?" "At least 6 royal households have been subjected to varying levels of surveillance and exploitation," he replied grimly. "Most families have been reluctant to publicize the harassment, hoping to resolve it quietly. Unfortunately, this has allowed the operation to expand and become more sophisticated." Alexander stood and moved to the window, observing the ongoing documentation of their neighbors' activities. "Deputy Commissioner, what are our options for immediate resolution? We can't allow this to continue, and we can't let them profit from violating our privacy." "Based on the evidence your team has gathered today, we can arrest the entire operation immediately," the Deputy Commissioner replied. "We have sufficient evidence for charges of harassment, privacy violations, organized surveillance, and potentially conspiracy to defraud. The Thornfields and their associates will be in custody by this evening." Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her as she realized their nightmare was approaching its end. "What about the content they've already sold to media outlets? Can we prevent publication?" "Our legal team has already secured emergency injunctions preventing publication of any content obtained through illegal surveillance," the Deputy Commissioner assured her. "Any media outlet that publishes the material will face severe legal consequences and financial penalties." As afternoon approached, Elena and Alexander watched from their study window as law enforcement vehicles surrounded the Thornfield property. The neighbors who had caused them so much stress and violated their privacy were finally facing consequences for their actions. The arrests happened swiftly and efficiently, with Mrs. Thornfield maintaining her arrogant demeanor even as law enforcement officers led her away in handcuffs. Elena watched from her study window as boxes of surveillance equipment were carried out of the neighboring mansion. Finally understanding the true scope of the operation that had been targeting her family, Alexander stood beside his wife, his arm around her shoulders, as they witnessed the end of their ordeal. "It's remarkable how much equipment they had installed," he observed. "This was clearly a much larger operation than we initially realized." James Morrison approached with final documentation from the arrests and searches. "Your Highnesses, the evidence recovered is extensive. Beyond the surveillance equipment, we found detailed files on 6 royal families, financial records showing payments from multiple media outlets, and communication logs detailing their systematic approach to exploiting royal privacy." Elena felt a mixture of relief and lingering anger as she processed the extent of the violation they had experienced. "James, what happens to our property now? We can't continue living next door to a crime scene, and we certainly can't risk having new neighbors who might have similar intentions. The palace has already begun discussions about acquiring the neighboring property," James replied. "Given the security implications demonstrated by this incident, it makes sense to expand the royal estate boundaries to prevent similar future situations." Alexander nodded approvingly. "That's a sensible long-term solution. But what about the immediate aftermath? How do we restore our sense of security and privacy after such a comprehensive violation?" Deputy Commissioner Williams, who had remained on the estate to oversee the arrests and evidence collection, provided reassuring news. "Your Highnesses, we've implemented enhanced security protocols that will remain in place indefinitely. Additionally, the success of your documentation strategy has provided us with valuable intelligence about surveillance tactics targeting royal families." Elena felt proud of their decision to fight back rather than simply endure the harassment. "Deputy Commissioner, will our experience help protect other royal families from similar operations?" "Absolutely," he replied. "Your proactive response and evidence gathering has given us the tools we need to identify and disrupt similar operations before they can establish themselves. You've essentially helped us shut down an entire network of royal surveillance activities." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Elena's personal assistant with news that lifted everyone's spirits. "Your Highness, the media relations team has prepared a public statement about the arrests that positions you and Prince Alexander as victims who successfully fought back against organized harassment. The initial public response has been overwhelmingly supportive." Alexander smiled as he read the preliminary media coverage on his tablet. "Look at this, Elena. The headlines are focusing on our successful resistance to privacy invasion rather than the violations themselves. We've managed to control the narrative exactly as we hoped." Elena reviewed the news coverage with growing satisfaction. "The public seems to understand that we were victims of a criminal operation rather than participants in some kind of media scandal. That was exactly what I was hoping we could achieve." James Morrison provided additional good news about the legal proceedings. "Your Highnesses, the prosecutor's office has indicated that the evidence is so comprehensive that the defendants are likely to accept plea agreements rather than risk trial. This means you probably won't have to testify publicly about the intimate details of the harassment." "That's an enormous relief," Elena admitted. "I was dreading the possibility of having to describe in open court how our private moments were violated and exploited." Alexander moved to his desk and began drafting a personal note to the other royal families who had been affected by similar operations. "I think we should reach out to the other families who were targeted by this network. They deserve to know that justice is being pursued and that enhanced protections are being implemented." Elena joined her husband at his desk, reading over his shoulder as he wrote. "That's very thoughtful, Alexander. They've probably been feeling as isolated and helpless as we did before we decided to fight back." As evening approached, their estate began returning to normal operations. The law enforcement vehicles departed, the evidence collection was completed, and the extra security personnel took up their new permanent positions. For the first time in weeks, Elena felt truly secure in her own home. James Morrison provided the final update of the day with news that exceeded all their expectations. "Your Highnesses, The financial investigation has revealed that the Thornfield operation generated over £2 million in revenue from exploiting royal privacy over the past 18 months. All of those proceeds are being seized and will be donated to the charitable foundations of the affected royal families. Elena looked up from her evening tea with surprise and delight. So something positive will actually come from this terrible experience. The money they made from violating our privacy will go to causes we care about? Exactly, James confirmed. The judge has ruled that the ill-gotten gains should benefit the victims' chosen charities. Your children's education foundation will receive a substantial donation from the seizure proceeds. Alexander set down his cup and moved to the window, looking out at their peaceful garden that was finally truly private again. Elena, I think we've learned something important about not allowing ourselves to be victims. When we chose to fight back rather than simply endure the harassment, we not only protected ourselves but helped protect other families and turned a criminal enterprise into a benefit for charitable causes. Elena joined her husband at the window, feeling genuinely peaceful for the first time since the Thornfields had moved in next door. Alexander, I think this experience has made us stronger as a couple and more effective as public figures. We've proven that royal dignity doesn't mean passive acceptance of mistreatment. 6 months later, Elena stood in the same east garden where she had first discovered Marcus Thornfield photographing her, but now the space felt completely transformed. The neighboring property had been acquired by the royal estate and converted into a beautiful extension of their private grounds, complete with additional security features that were virtually invisible to the casual observer. Alexander approached through the garden path, carrying 2 cups of morning tea, and wearing the relaxed expression that had returned to his face once their privacy was fully restored. The landscaping team has done remarkable work integrating the 2 properties, he observed, settling beside his wife on their favorite garden bench. Elena accepted her tea gratefully and surveyed the expanded gardens that now provided them with unprecedented privacy and security. It's hard to believe that 6 months ago we felt like prisoners in our own home. Now we have more freedom and privacy than we've ever enjoyed. James Morrison appeared on the garden path with his daily security briefing, but his demeanor was markedly more relaxed than during the crisis months. Your Highnesses, I have some satisfying updates about the legal proceedings. Mrs. Thornfield received a 2-year prison sentence yesterday, and her son Marcus has been sentenced to 18 months in juvenile detention. Mr. Thornfield received 3 years, and the private investigation firm's license has been permanently revoked. Alexander nodded with satisfaction. Those sentences seem appropriate given the systematic nature of their violations. What about the other families who were affected by the same network? All 6 affected households have reported significant improvements in their security and privacy, James replied. The enhanced protocols we developed during your case have been implemented across all royal residences, and we've seen no similar operations attempting to establish themselves. Elena felt proud of their role in protecting other royal families from similar harassment. James, have we received any updates about the charitable donations that resulted from the seized assets? The financial distributions were completed last month, James answered with a smile. Your children's education foundation received £400,000, which has already been put to excellent use expanding educational opportunities for underprivileged youth. The other affected families' chosen charities received similar substantial contributions. Alexander raised his teacup in a mock toast. So the Thornfields' criminal enterprise ultimately resulted in nearly £2.5 million being donated to worthy causes. There's a certain poetic justice in that outcome. Elena laughed genuinely for the first time in their garden since before the Thornfield crisis began. It's remarkable how something that felt so threatening and violating at the time has ultimately strengthened our marriage, improved security for all royal families, and generated substantial charitable contributions. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by the arrival of Elena's personal assistant with news that brought the Thornfield chapter to a completely satisfying conclusion. Your Highness, I've just received word that the Thornfield property sale proceeds after legal fees and restitution payments will be insufficient to cover their debts. They'll be financially ruined when they're released from prison. Alexander considered this development with mixed feelings. While I don't take pleasure in anyone's financial destruction, there's something appropriate about their losing everything they gained through violating our privacy. Elena felt more philosophical about their former neighbor's fate. Alexander, I think they chose their own consequences when they decided to treat our private lives as commercial opportunities. We didn't create their legal and financial problems. We simply refused to be victimized by their schemes. James Morrison provided the final piece of satisfying news. Your Highnesses, the media coverage of your successful resistance to the surveillance operation has apparently discouraged similar schemes targeting other public figures. Intelligence services report a significant decline in organized privacy violations against celebrities and public officials. Elena stood and walked to the border where the Thornfield property had once begun, now seamlessly integrated into their own estate. James, do you think we'll face similar challenges in the future? There will always be individuals who attempt to exploit public figures, James replied honestly. But your response to the Thornfield operation has established a clear precedent that such activities will be aggressively prosecuted and that victims can successfully fight back. I believe that precedent will serve as a strong deterrent. Alexander joined his wife at the former property boundary, reflecting on how dramatically their situation had improved. Elena, I think this experience taught us that we have more power to protect ourselves than we initially realized. We don't have to accept harassment or exploitation simply because of our public status. Elena turned to survey their expanded estate, feeling genuinely grateful for the privacy and security they now enjoyed. Alexander, I think we've also learned the importance of refusing to be intimidated by people who try to profit from our discomfort. The Thornfields expected us to be passive victims, but we chose to be active defenders of our rights. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of children's laughter from the new playground area that had been constructed in the former Thornfield garden space. Local children from the village were enjoying the monthly community event that Elena had established as a way of sharing their expanded estate with their neighbors. Look at that, Elena said with deep satisfaction. The space that was once used to violate our privacy is now being used to bring joy to children in our community. That feels like the perfect transformation of something negative into something positive. Alexander put his arm around his wife as they watched the children play. Elena, I think we've created the best possible ending to a very difficult chapter in our lives. We protected ourselves, helped other families, supported charitable causes, and ultimately created more good than harm from the entire experience. Elena leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling completely content with their resolution of the Thornfield crisis. Alexander, I think we've proven that royal dignity doesn't require passive acceptance of mistreatment. Sometimes the most dignified response is to fight back intelligently and effectively. As they walked hand in hand back toward their manor house, Elena reflected that their home truly felt like a sanctuary again. But now it was a sanctuary they had actively created and defended, rather than one they had simply inherited.